We are living in an age where machines can simulate creativity, generate language, compose music, and even mimic empathy. But in the quiet moments when the screen goes dark, when the noise recedes, many still feel something missing. That's not a failure of technology. That's a reflection of our own misunderstanding of what it means to be aware, to be alive. In 1972, the crew of Apollo 17 gave us a photograph that changed how we see ourselves, what came to be called the blue marble. A full Earth, suspended in space, with no borders, no ideologies, no divisions. Just a planet-tour, planet adorned in clouds and oceans, floating in a void. That image wasn't merely a technological triumph, it was a cosmological mirror. It confronted us with a truth we often overlook. We are one species, sharing one habitat, subject to the same laws of physics as every other object in the universe. Yet paradoxically, as we've become more connected through networks of data and communication, many of us feel more isolated than ever before. This isn't a metaphysical mystery. It's a question of misalignment between what we've evolved to feel and what we've designed around us. You see, the brain is not just a processor of information, it's a simulator of meaning. It asks questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What does it all amount to? Those aren't spiritual questions. They're human questions, cognitive reflections of a consciousness evolved not just to survive, but to wonder. But maybe the issue isn't that we lack answers. Maybe it's that our perceptual apparatus or biology, our culture, even our language filters out most of reality by default. That's not a bug in the system. That's evolution at work. Your senses evolved not to show you what's true, but what's useful for survival. So here we are, cosmic beings made of atoms, forged in stellar furnaces, trying to interpret reality through 5 limited senses and a nervous system tuned more for tribal fear than for universal perspective. That's not mysticism. That's neuroscience. That's physics. That's the tension of being human. And in that tension, we invent metaphors like the veil to represent the distance between what we see and what we suspect lies beyond our perception. But instead of lifting that veil with superstition, what if we pull it back with science? Let's do just that. Let's step back and look to the stars. Roughly 13.8 billion years ago, everything we now observe in the cosmos, every planet, every atom, every photon was compressed into an infinitesimal point. Then, in a moment of staggering elegance, it expanded, not into space, but as space. That event, which we call the Big Bang, wasn't just a beginning. It was a declaration that complexity could emerge from simplicity, that structure could emerge from chaos, and that life eventually could emerge from lifelessness. Stars formed, massive luminous spheres of plasma, fusing hydrogen into helium, and eventually into heavier elements like carbon, oxygen, and iron. These stars weren't eternal. They lived, they burned, and they died in cataclysmic supernovae that scattered their elemental remains across space. That cosmic debris, that's you. The iron coursing through your veins, the calcium in your bones, the carbon that defines organic chemistry, all of it originated in stars that lived and died before our sun was even born. You are not merely in the universe is in you. This isn't poetic license, it's empirical reality. Carl Sagan once said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." That's not sentiment. That's a recognition of the role consciousness plays in a universe that would otherwise be silent. And yet, somehow, in spite of this epic origin story, we forget. We label ourselves by our occupations, our social roles, our follower counts, as if the essence of a person could ever be captured in a resume or username. It's almost comical, if not so tragic. A species made of stars, distracted by notifications. Why is that? Because the brain evolved to filter. The vast majority of electromagnetic radiation is invisible to us. We don't see X-rays, we don't perceive radio waves or gamma bursts. The visible spectrum is just a sliver of reality less than 1% of the full electromagnetic field. And yet we call that sliver reality, So here's the question. If we're blind to most of the light around us, what else might we be missing? Could it be that our sense of separation, of isolation, is not just psychological, but physiological? That we mistake sensory limitation for ontological truth? That's not a spiritual veil. That's a scientific filter. And it matters. Because the moment you internalize the fact that your body is composed of recycled stardust, that your mind is a structure of neural nets shaped by both evolution and experience, that your very breath participates in a planetary carbon cycle older than civilization, you begin to realize that awakening isn't about rejecting science. It's about finally understanding what science has been saying all along. You're not separate. You're entangled with everything. From the moment we enter the world, we are inundated with script systems of belief, value, and identity, handed down not by villains, but by well-meaning participants of inherited structures. These systems aren't inherently malicious, but they are often outdated, and more importantly, they are rarely questioned. Take our educational institutions. We reward memorization over curiosity. We celebrate the correct answer over the provocative question. We teach Newton's laws and Einstein's relativity, but rarely encourage students to ask, why do we value certainty in an inherently uncertain universe? We present atoms as miniature solar systems with electrons orbiting nuclei like tiny planets. It's a convenient model, but it's wrong. In reality, electrons don't orbit at all. They exist in probability fields, what physicists call clouds, where their positions are not fixed, but smeared across space. The entire framework of quantum mechanics is built on uncertainty, not clarity. On probabilities, not absolutes. And yet, we condition minds to expect predictability. That's not education, that's domestication. Worse still, we define intelligence as the capacity to produce outcomes society already values to scores. Productivity, compliance. Rarely do we train young minds to ask what it means to be intelligent in the first place. Rarely do we pause to reflect that the universe itself, governed by entropy, emergence, and evolution, does not operate on linear logic or bureaucratic benchmarks. It thrives on diversity, complexity, and chaos. But we reward uniformity. Is it any wonder, then, that people grow up alienated from their origins? That they see themselves not as stardust with agency, but as economic units with quotas? This isn't just sociological, it's cognitive. The human brain contains a structure known as the default mode network, a set of interconnected regions that activates when we're not focused on external tasks. It's associated with introspection, self-referential thinking, and yes, daydreaming. But this same network, studies suggest, also contributes to our sense of separateness. It constructs a story, I am here, and everything else is out there. That story, while evolutionarily useful, is neurologically arbitrary. Because the atoms that make up you and not you are identical. The difference is not physical, it's organizational. So when we talk about lifting the veil, we're not invoking mysticism. We're talking about dismantling cognitive and cultural constructs that have hardened into dogma. This isn't about rebelling against systems. It's about upgrading them to match what science and our own experience is already telling us. That meaning doesn't come from metrics. That truth doesn't require permission. That consciousness, however, mysterious emerges not in isolation, but in relationship. And that education, if it is to mean anything at all, must start not with answers, but with awe. The human eye is a marvel of biological engineering. It can distinguish over 10 million colors, detect a single photon in darkness, and coordinate with the brain to render a coherent image of the world around us. And yet, what we call visible light is merely a sliver less than 1% off the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves, invisible. Infrared, imperceptible. Ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, entire domains of radiation surrounding us at all times, and we are blind to them. So let's ask the obvious but often neglected question. If we only perceive a tiny fraction of physical light, what else are we missing? That's not a rhetorical flourish. It's a scientific invitation. Because every time we invent a new tool, a telescope that sees an infrared, a detector for gravitational waves, we discover layers of reality that were always there, but hidden from our senses. Reality didn't change, our tools did. So what we call truth is often just the current limit of our instruments. In that sense, the so-called veil that separates us from a fuller understanding of existence is not a curtain of mysticism, it's a frontier of perception. Evolution shaped our senses not to perceive all that is, but to prioritize what's necessary for survival. It's not that we're flawed, we're optimized for now. But the cosmos is vastly indifferent to what our eyes can or cannot detect. To assume our current experience of reality is complete would be to mistake the keyhole for the landscape. And this brings us to a crucial insight. Much of what we interpret as normal, our routines, assumptions, even identities, a product not of truth, but of limited input. We are sense-bound organisms trying to grasp an unbounded cosmos. No wonder we invent metaphors. No wonder we build religions, philosophies, and particle accelerators. Because somewhere deep within, we suspect there's more. And that suspicion is not fantasy, it's the fuel of science. Consider the cosmic microwave background. A faint glow, just 2.7 degrees above absolute zero, permeating the universe. It's the afterglow of the Big Bang. For billions of years, it went unnoticed until we built detectors sensitive enough to see it. That radiation was always there. Just like so many aspects of our existence might be waiting not for belief, but for better tools, better questions, better minds. This is the scientific method at its finest. Not a catalog of answers, but a habit of humility, a discipline of not knowing. And from that not knowing, a hunger to see more, to understand deeper, to peel back yet another layer of what we once thought was the whole. If there is a veil, then curiosity is the hand that draws it back. We often speak of memory as if it were a database, as though the brain were a vault that stores our past, waiting for us to unlock it. But neuroscience paints a very different picture. Memory is not a passive archive. It is active, reconstructive, and profoundly shaped by the present. Every time you recall a moment, you are not retrieving an unchanging file. You are rebuilding it, influenced by your current emotions, beliefs, and neural state. In that sense, memory is not just about the past. It's a process through which we narrate the present. It's how we make sense of who we are. But here's the twist. If our memories are fluid, if our identities are partially constructed by unstable recollections, then who exactly is the you think you are? Physics offers its own version of this question. At the quantum level, particles do not have definite positions until they are observed. Electrons are not little balls circling nuclei. They exist as probability distributions, as clouds of potential that collapse into actuality only when measured. What if the self operates the same way? What if identity isn't fixed, but probabilistic? What if you are a field of tendencies, habits, reactions, and memories constantly collapsing into momentary form based on context, attention, and interaction? That's not philosophy. That's quantum-informed cognitive science. And it challenges a core assumption of modern society, that people are static, that you are your resume, that you are the sum of your past decisions, that once labeled, you remain labeled. But entropy disagrees. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that systems evolve. They become more complex, more open, more surprising. If a star can collapse into a black hole and then radiate away its mass through Hawking radiation, why can't a person evolve beyond the story they've been told? What science shows again and again is that the universe does not reward stagnation, it rewards transformation. And so when people speak of awakening, of lifting the veil, they are often intuitively reaching for a truth that science quietly confirms, that the boundary between who we are and what we might become is thinner than we think. You are not the job you hold. You are not the mistakes you've made. You are a localized phenomenon of matter, energy, and consciousness capable of self-reflection, symbolic language, abstract reasoning, and moral choice. You are the cosmos contemplating itself through a neural lattice of 86 billion firing neurons. And when you begin to see yourself this way, not as a consumer or a category or a demographic, but as a momentary configuration of the universe's own awareness, then the veil isn't just lifted, it dissolves because you no longer need it. We live in an era of unparalleled technological achievement. We've mapped the human genome, landed robots on Mars, and carry in our pockets more computational power than NASA had during the Apollo missions. Our devices can track our steps, monitor our sleep, and suggest what we should watch, buy, or eat often before we even ask. And yet, depression, anxiety, and loneliness are rising globally. According to the World Health Organization, over 280 million people suffer from depression. Suicide remains a leading cause of death among young people in war zones, but in stable, affluent societies. This isn't a fringe issue, this is a species-wide signal. So how is it that a civilization smart enough to build self-driving cars can't seem to figure out how to make its people want to live? It's tempting to say we've lost our soul, but let's stay grounded. Let's instead examine this through the lens of design mismatch. Human beings evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in small, interdependent tribes. Our brains are wired for face-to-face communication, mutual obligation, and slow rhythms of nature. But in just a few centuries of blink in evolutionary time, we've constructed an environment that overwhelms our nervous systems. We are inundated with data, not wisdom. We experience visibility, not connection. We optimize for efficiency, not depth. The human brain, brilliant though it is, did not evolve to process the emotional implications of 1,000 digital comparisons per day. Nor is it adapted to scrolling endlessly through curated lives while questioning our own. This isn't a moral failure, it's a cognitive mismatch. We have crafted a world where attention is monetized, where outrage is amplified, and where silence is rare. And in that world, it's not surprising that many feel unmoored, because meaning cannot be engineered, belonging cannot be downloaded, and purpose cannot be optimized by algorithm. We've mistaken access to information for access to truth. But science reminds us that understanding requires more than data. It requires context, connection, curiosity, pattern recognition, and a willingness to confront complexity rather than reduce it to hashtags and headlines. The tragedy of our time is not that we lack tools, it's that our tools have outpaced our philosophy. And that gap between technological capacity and psychological maturity is not sustainable, but it is addressable. If, and only if, we choose to rehumanize the systems we've built, that starts with seeing ourselves not as users of reality, but as participants in a much older, much grander, much more mysterious unfolding of cosmic storylines. Throughout history, change has often been invisible until it becomes irreversible. Continental drift was once unthinkable. Now we teach plate tectonics in middle school. The notion that invisible microbes could shape global health was mocked until germ theory reshaped medicine. And not long ago, the idea that a single person with a camera could ignite global awareness was unfathomable until social networks became accelerants for collective action. So when people speak of a shift happening in humanity's some awakening, some veil lifting, it's easy to dismiss it as poetic or metaphorical. But if we're willing to look through the lens of systems science and complexity theory, a different picture emerges sown not of mysticism, but of threshold dynamics. In physics, we call it a phase transition, a moment when a system, after accumulating subtle internal changes, abruptly reorganizes into a new state. Ice melting into water, water boiling into vapor. The components remain, but the structure and the behavior change dramatically. Human societies operate in similar ways. A tipping point in culture doesn't begin with a revolution. It begins with small divergences in behavior that once reaching critical mass, becomes self-reinforcing. This is not mysticism. This is emergence principle observed in everything from bird flocks to neural networks. And right now, by every measurable indicator shifts in values, economic participation, political engagement, even online discourse, something is changing. People are beginning to question inherited assumptions. Not because they've read ancient scrolls or gazed into crystals, but because the systems they were promised would deliver fulfillment aren't delivering. This questioning is not rebellion, it's homeostasis, a system trying to rebalance itself after prolonged stress, a mind seeking resonance after being tuned to noise for too long. And the science of networks tells us when enough nodes in a system adjust their behavior, the entire network reorganizes. So when you start asking deeper questions, what does my life revolve around? Or what am I optimizing for? You're not stepping outside society. You are participating in its evolution. The shift doesn't need permission. It needs momentum. And that momentum begins with perception. With individuals who no longer see themselves as passive occupants of a broken machine, but as conscious agents in a dynamic, self-aware system. This isn't idealism, it's pattern recognition. It's what happens when neurons fire in synchrony when the brain becomes aware of itself. What we're seeing in humanity may be the early stages of the same thing, self-awareness at scale. In quantum physics, there exists a phenomenon so counterintuitive that even Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. It's called entanglementa state, in which two particles become linked in such a way that measuring one instantaneously affects the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are in space. This is not science fiction. It is observable, repeatable, and verifiable. Now, let's take a speculative but scientifically inspired leap. What if human consciousness or emotion is entangled in ways we don't yet fully understand? What if the experience of empathy, of feeling someone else's pain or joy, isn't just metaphorical resonance, but a kind of psychosocial entanglement? After all, our brains are social organs. Mirror neurons fire when we witness the emotions of others. Our physiology responds not just to what happens to us, but to what happens to those around us. In that sense, compassion is not just a virtue, it's a form of resonance. And like all resonances, it can propagate. Imagine empathy as a gravitational wave in the fabric of our shared experience. A single act of kindness, a calm word in chaos. A moment of real presence sends ripples through the emotional space-time of everyone it touches. You may not see its final destination, but the physics is in motion. This isn't mystical, it's systemic. In physics, gravity is a force that doesn't command, it persuades. It doesn't shout, it bends. It shapes the trajectory of everything without ever asking permission. Now imagine that human presence rooted, coherent, attentive operates the same way. Not as control, but as curvature. Not as dominance, but as influence. You felt this before. In a room of panic, someone steady becomes the gravity. In a storm of opinion, someone listening becomes the anchor. In a world accelerating toward distraction, someone grounded becomes a reference point. These aren't personality traits. These are energetic geometries, real-time fields of coherence that reorganize the space around them. And just like in physics, coherence is contagious. In biology, it's called entrainment, the synchronization of rhythmic systems, heartbeats, brainwaves, circadian rhythms. When organisms share space, their internal systems tend to align. So when one person becomes present genuinely, fully, they give permission for others to do the same, not through advice, not through argument, but through coherence. That's not spirituality, that's thermodynamics. The universe always moves toward equilibrium, and a regulated nervous system is more stable than a chaotic one. So what if awakening isn't something dramatic? What if it's a slow gravitational turn toward inner coherence? A quiet, contagious alignment? Not all revolutions arrive with noise. Some arrive like gravity, slow, constant, invisible, until structure rearranges itself around the new center. In the 1950s, researchers observed a curious behavior among Japanese macaques on the island of Koshima. One monkey began washing sweet potatoes in water before eating theme and novel behavior never seen before. Over time, other monkeys copied it. And then, according to the more mythologized versions of the story, something remarkable happened. Once a certain number, often cited as the 100th monkey, adopted the behavior, monkeys on other islands, with no direct contact, reportedly began doing the same. The implication? That consciousness or learning could somehow leap across geographic boundaries via some unseen field. It's a compelling narrative, but like many stories that resonate emotionally, it deserves scientific scrutiny. Most scholars agree that the 100th monkey effect, as popularly told, lacks empirical rigor. The original observations were far more nuanced, and no clear evidence supported psychic transmission of behavior across isolated populations. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. While the metaphor may be exaggerated, the underlying idea that cultural behaviors can spread rapidly once a threshold is reachedis very real. Sociologists call this diffusion of innovation. In network theory, it's known as contagion dynamics. In ecology and complex systems science, we refer to it as critical mass or tipping points. The principle is simple. When enough individuals adopt a new behavior, value, or paradigm, it begins to spread exponentially, not linearly. What once seemed fringe becomes mainstream, not because of external coercion, but because the network itself reorganizes. This happens with technology. It happens with fashion. It happens with language, ideology, and even perception. In that sense, your individual actions, your choices to live more consciously, ethically, or curiously may seem insignificant in isolation. But systems don't shift from above. They shift from within. Every node in a network counts. And humans are exceptionally good at mirroring. Our neural wiring predisposes us to model behavior we observe, especially when it comes from someone coherent, confident, or calm under pressure. That's why mass transformation doesn't begin with persuasion. It begins with demonstration. Not with shouting into the void, but with living in such a way that others feel drawn to recalibrate, not because you told them to, but because coherence is attractive. You don't need mystical fields to explain this. You need biology, cognitive science, social psychology. So yes, there may be no magical 100th monkey, but there is absolutely a tipping point, and we may be living through one. In the vast expanse of cosmic time, civilizations come and go. Stars are born, live and die. Galaxies collide. Black holes evaporate. The universe evolves not with drama, but with patience, precision, process. And within that unfolding on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, we find a species not content with survival, a species that asks questions, that writes poetry, that builds machines to examine the very atoms it's made from. That's you. You are not an accident of carbon chemistry. You are a localized phenomenon of universal complexity, emerging temporarily to ask, in your own way, what is all this for? That question alone is astonishing. But here's the insight science offers. You don't have to wait for permission to make meaning. You don't have to dismantle society to participate in its evolution. You don't need a movement, a moment, or a miracle. You need coherence. Coherence between your values and your actions. Between what you know and how you live. Between what you see and what you choose to focus on. The veil, if there is one, is not lifted with rituals. It lifts the moment perception and participation align, because physics has taught us nothing changes until energy moves. And neuroscience reminds us nothing becomes real until it's observed. So observe, align, move. You are not small. You are a node in a conscious cosmos capable of adjusting its own trajectory. The new Earth people speak of, it's not another place. It's this place, seen through new eyes. It's this moment, approached with deeper awareness. It's the same physics, but with different observers. That shift doesn't need fanfare. It happens every time someone chooses understanding over reaction. Every time a person becomes the calm in a storm. Every time a child asks a question and the adult says, let's find out. The cosmos has never asked us to be perfect. It has only ever asked us to participate. So shine a not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. Orbit not around distraction, but around truth. Be gravity not as control, but as stability. Because in the end, the universe doesn't care if you believe in the veil. It only responds to energy, attention, and action. And perhaps, just perhaps this moment right now, where you're reading these words and feeling something stir isn't the universe whispering to you, but the universe recognizing itself through you.